Welcome to SoulHygiene. Real conversations about life, love, forgiveness, grace, and God. I'm Miss Teejay, and this podcast was born from the life God pulled me out of. After years of pain and trauma, He rescued me, renewed me, repurposed me, and showed me how to love life again in Him. Here we talk with guests who've walked through the fire or who are still walking through trials. Some are healing and others are champions for healing. Sometimes we cry, sometimes we laugh, but every story points back to hope. My prayer is that something you hear today reminds you, no matter how broken life feels, God still loves you and wants what's best for you. This is SoulHygiene, a mission of grace and restoration, helping victims become victorious. Hi, friends. I had a cancellation tonight. I was supposed to record with my good friend, but he got sick, unfortunately. 'Tis the season, right? So I've kind of had this thought on my mind lately, and I thought this would be a great time to just sit down and just record. I get a little nervous when I do that. I'm better, talking to somebody, but we're going to do this because I really think that it's something important that needs to be said. And I am hoping that it'll help someone. So I'm really grateful that you joined me today. And, the thought is that every one of us walks in a story. We have memories that we cherish. We also have memories and wounds that we didn't necessarily ask for, right? And those memories, those moments, they do shape us. They shape our personalities when we're younger. They kind of readjust our thinking, which isn't always the correct thinking. But I just want to give you some encouragement that God sees all of that. There is nothing that we go through that is hidden from Him. So today, I think we're going to talk about what it means to live inside God's truth and inside His reality, not inside ours, not inside, the world's chaos, not in our fears, and especially not in the stories we tell ourselves. I just did a podcast episode with my friend, Mr. Rob Scott, my forgiveness guy, and we talked a little bit about, anxiety, telling ourselves stories and replaying things in our heads, worrying about things that are never going to come to fruition, right? But I just want to tell you that God's truth is steady, it's honest, and it's faithful. So I hope you'll slow down with me, kind of settle your heart a little bit, and kind of just take this walk with me for a few minutes. And I hope that it helped you. I jotted down a few notes just to kind of keep my mind on track because I can, chase rabbits here and there. But I think when you're living in God's reality and His honest truth, right, it can get emotional. I cry when I pray, and I'm a very emotional person. I have really developed, I think, in the last probably 2 to 3 years, an emotional maturity that I had never had. And that all comes from God dealing with me, God showing me things in my life, right? But trusting God, having faith in God, asking God into your heart, that is a truth. That is something, that is a peace, that's something you can rely on, but it's not always an emotional moment. And that's okay. It's really okay. It doesn't have to be an emotional moment. I don't believe that God is the God of hype. I don't believe that He's the God of spiritual theatrics. It's just the truth of His word. his presence and his authority. I lived for all those years with unworthiness, and none of us are worthy, honestly. But I had this sense of worthlessness, right? Um, like I didn't know who I was. And the world tells you you're on your own, do it yourself, right? Um, in that your worth comes from success, what you build, what you earn. But God says, you belong to me. And He reminds you that your identity begins in Him, not with this culture or your achievements. See, it doesn't matter how society changes because God's truth doesn't. It never shifts. He doesn't adjust himself to match our mood or our circumstances. And that's the great thing about God. He remains steady. When life is spinning out of control, you know that you can trust him because he never changes. He remains steady. So the question becomes, where do you place your identity? Do you place your identity in God's word? Do you trust God's word? Or do you place your identity in the opinions of people who change week to week? And I think that's the society we live in is you change with the person who changes next to you instead of being the person God created. So I wrote down a few verses to, kind of help us through. And there's quite a few verses, so I'll probably pick a few, but um, each thought I kind of have a verse that goes along with it. And I think the ones right now that I wrote down were John 17:17, where God says, sanctify them through thy truth. Thy word is truth. And in the Bible, it says, God is the word. So if the word is truth, that means God is right. Um, Hebrews 13:8 says, Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever. He doesn't change. He doesn't go with the flow and, you know, every whim that comes along. The Bible doesn't adjust and he doesn't adjust to that thought process. Like I said before, that he's steady. And that's why you can rely on him. That's why when you go to him, you know exactly what to do. When you go into the Bible and you read, you know exactly what he's saying because he has said it. It's never changed. So the question would be, why do we struggle with God's truth and staying in God's reality? Right? Because we all have these days, everyone has their own reality. And that is a lot of the times, and I want to make sure I am careful with my words, but a lot of the realities that people have in their heads is not reality. And I am hoping, that's what soul hygiene is about, is taking your victimized mindset and becoming victorious over that. But no matter your path, no matter what you're living with inside your head, God's truth is steady. But why do we struggle? I struggled for 25 years. I had God within me. I had him within my heart since 1995, but I had some things happen to me that took me off course. And I was not secure in who God was. that he could. So my trauma, my wounds, they started whispering these little lies to me, you know? And for me, fear became familiar. I acclimated to the abuse to where those little things in my head were there's no way out. This is your quote unquote reality. This is all there is. For other people, they chase control or they're just comfortable. And I always say we don't learn and grow in comfortable situations. You know, there were many people through the Bible who went through trials. And I know one that everyone knows about, whether you believe in God or have read the Bible, is Job. Job lost his whole family, he lost everything. And at the end of the day, he still praised God. So the other thing is like we can get distracted. Job wasn't distracted from what he believed, right? He didn't stay comfortable, that's for sure. But through that whole process, he still learned, he still grew. And the people around him saw Job still faithful, still resting, still abiding in God's grace and mercy. There's some people who chase approval. I was kind of a yes, sir. I was always afraid to say no and kind of became overwhelmed with never saying no, which I have learned how to do now. But we don't have to chase people's approval. Some people do that because they think that'll satisfy, but it never does. Whether someone thinks you're great or not, it doesn't matter. What does God think? So I guess I would ask, like, when you get heartbroken, when things happen, when you're going through that trial that you're like, why me? Why again? Where do you run? Do you run to people who live in their own reality? Do you overwork yourself because you just don't want to deal with it, right? Do you isolate yourself, become a hermit because the world is way too scary? I don't want to go out there, God. I don't want to have to deal with it. Do you medicate yourself with alcohol or drugs so that you're not thinking clearly? The one thing that a lot of people don't do is when they're going through it, they don't pray. They don't sit with God and just say, hey, God, I need your help. He says, come as you are. He accepts you as you are. Even as a Christian who fails, I was at my lowest in 2019, in February of 2019, on that precipice. And the only thing I could do was look up and ask God for help. In Romans 7:19, it says, for the good that I would, I do not, but the evil which I would not, that I do. So instead of relying on God, we would rather not and try to do things on our own. I've been there. I'm preaching to myself too. I'm not really preaching, but you know what I mean. This is me. I have been through everything in my life. Sometimes I feel like. So anything that I am telling you, it's because I've learned from it. It's because God has instilled in me this peace, this truth now that I can tell people and be like, this is real. Matthew 26:41 says, Jesus tells the disciples, watch and pray that ye enter not into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, the flesh is awfully weak. That's paraphrasing, but it says, but the flesh is weak. It is awfully weak. And the Lord knows my heart, and He knows that I can fall into that temptation just like anyone. But I think the one thing that I hope people really realize, especially in this day and age, is a verse, 1 Corinthians 14:33, where it says, for God is not the author of confusion, but of peace. You cannot think that God is going to bless your life if, number one, if you are confusing people. That is not the Spirit of God. Absolutely not the Spirit. If you are the one deceiving people, you're the one confusing people. God wants you to have peace. So if you have a mind of confusion, it doesn't have to be that way. God says in Psalms, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, but I know it's in Psalms. He says, be still and know that I am God. And sometimes all we need to do is rest. Just rest. Ask God. Ask Him for patience. Ask Him for long suffering. Ask Him, to help you not be angry. Ask Him to take some things off your plate so you can rest. I don't tell very many people this, and I think this is the first time I've actually said kind of how my daily life is. But I work a full-time job, 8 to 9 hours a day. I am a full-time caregiver to both my elderly parents. And then I'm trying to start a company at night. I do podcasting at night, trying to, make SoulHygiene a brand movement. I've been working a full-time job since I was 14 years old. I worked a full-time job to help my family because we didn't have money, and went to school. And I have worked a full-time job since I was 14. My first job was Hardee's. But, I used work as my escape all my life. In my teen years, I used it for a different kind of escape. And then when the things happened to me when I was 18 and a half, 19 years old, that changed the trajectory of my life and my thought process, I used work to try to not think about it. Everything in my power to try to just not think about it until 2019 when everything came crashing down. And that's all I had was to think about it. I went through 25 years of people looking at me like I was fine. I did my best to be a good wife. I did my best to be a good mother. I made mistakes. And the only thing that I regret truly is that my kids had to experience it. But even my kids, I feel like my kids are very intuitive because, when you're a single mom, your kids kind of adapt to your sense of emotion, right? I don't know if that makes sense, but they know how you're feeling. And so my kids always knew when I was unraveling inside. You know, I believed in God. We went to church off and on for those 25 years. And yet I lived as though He was a long distance friend. I prayed. I prayed all the time, but I didn't rest. I hoped. I hoped in a great future. I hoped that things would stop. I hoped that things would get better, but I didn't trust God to take care of it. And maybe you've been there. maybe your faith is intact, but maybe it's not. And maybe your peace is gone. Sometimes God has to bring us that trial and has to bring us low to help us understand that we can't fix it ourselves, right? When I finally got to that point and just said, it was that third night, 3 nights of no sleep. And I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but when you get to that point and you're like, God, please just help me. Just take it all away. Take the anger away. Take this anxiety, this depression that I'm feeling all of a sudden, just take it all away. And I just sat there and it was quiet and still. And it was almost a peace that I'd never known. He didn't remove the storm. He didn't remove all the challenges. He didn't remove the trauma. But you know what? It changed how I carry them now. Because God became more than just an idea. Now he is the one that walks with me. He's the one that took all of those circumstances that I went through, all that trauma, all that pain that I went through. And he helped me find blessings. I can talk about my past. I can talk about things that have happened to me. And I don't cry. I don't have those immediate triggers that just all of a sudden I break down. It used to happen. I used to have severe nightmares for a very long time. But now I look back and God has given me the strength to look at it from a different angle, from a different light. And now I see where there were instances where I could have died. Something could have happened to me. And God just said no. Or he walked with us. My kids never had, thank goodness, any severe illnesses or broken bones until they got older, started longboarding and skateboarding. That's a whole nother different topic. We talk about children, but my kids were protected. And even when we had moved to Chicago, we lived in a pretty bad area of town, which unbeknownst to me, I didn't know. But we were the minority, and I had never known that. I come from a town where, unfortunately, we're the majority. But I went there and we were the minority, and God really helped me to hone my empathy, I think, in those times. But he also protected us. He protected us greatly with people who didn't even know us. So someday maybe I'll go into the story of us living in Chicago. But, I just want to encourage you that those storms you're going through, they'll end. At some point, they'll end. But it's how you carry what happened through those storms with you for the rest of your life. Are you always going to look back and cry and then become a stumbling block to you in your life? Or are you going to look back and say, God protected me? There's a blessing I can find. Psalm 34:18 says, the Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart. He doesn't want people to suffer. He doesn't want people to be down or, unfortunately, marriages to be broken. He doesn't like that. He doesn't like broken. I think in Isaiah, I wrote it down here. Okay. Isaiah 41:10, it says, "Fear thou not, for I am with thee." And I think I carry that with me a lot because no matter what I'm going through, I know that God's with me. And that day on that precipice of ending everything, I look back now and I see that I surrendered my version of reality, which was a false reality, and chose his and his truth. So when you surrender that and you start walking, there are signs. God gives us the fruits of the Spirit in the Bible, and it says, you will know them by their fruit. So, how do you know that you're living in God's truth? One thing is that you pray before you panic. And this is something that I have I have been truly blessed to have adapted in my life because I used to have severe anxiety. And now I practice the pause and I pray before I panic. It's a lot of P's, but it's true. If I'm my heart starts beating really fast and I feel like, oh boy, I'm feeling very overwhelmed. I'm about to have a panic attack. Take a deep breath and I pray, God, help me just get through this. Settle my heart. Let me think clearly. And, I haven't had anxiety in a very long time. And I'm very thankful for that. I almost get emotional thinking about it because through those 25 years, my anxiety was so great and I had to keep it in. I couldn't express myself. I couldn't be who God created me to be. I think the other thing is that you choose truth over emotion. Our feelings lie to us. Our perceptions and our opinions lie to us. That's where we get this false reality. But if you rely on God's truth, you'll know and you'll rest instead of having that emotion, whatever that emotion is, right? Now, a caveat, emotions are not bad. God created us with emotions, okay? And there are times when we need to rest and figure out what emotion is bothering me, right? And I think I'm going to do another segment on how our emotions affect our body. There's a lot of things I truly believe now that I've researched, and that will be something else. So I'm not going to really go into that right now, but it is something that I will do in the future. Um, I think the biggest thing that soul hygiene is that we have to come to the point where we forgive, even if it hurts, even if we are never going to get an apology. We need to forgive. God forgave me. There is no one that I cannot forgive. And I think if we truly take accountability and look at ourselves as sinful creatures, forgiveness wouldn't be that hard. And I'm not going to go deep into that right now. That also is another segment I'm working on because forgiveness can be hard, especially when there is physical trauma, emotional trauma that happens to a person. It can be hard. I think the other thing is you stop letting the, oh, how should I put it? Shame. You stop letting the shame dictate or narrate your identity. And you learn to rest in the storm. You learn to rest in the situation, even if it doesn't change. So, I said earlier, I take care of both my parents, and I'm blessed to take care of them. They were there for me all those years when I needed them. But for the most part, I do it alone, and it's very hard. My situation is not going to change at this juncture. And although overwhelming, I get to see them love each other, be there for each other, even though they're losing their memory. My, you know, it's hard sometimes to see your parents' frailty, right? And I did not know that this was going to be so personal for me. But I'm only talking what I feel like God is bringing to my mind. But in that situation, God has taught me to rest because it's not going to change, right? My peace doesn't depend on my circumstances anymore. It doesn't depend if I'm successful. It doesn't depend on if I'm in a loving relationship. Um, it doesn't depend on if I have money, because I don't. But that's neither here nor there. Um, my peace does not rest in that. It solely now rests in God, because God holds me. A few verses I had, were Philippians 4:6. It says, "Be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer. And the peace of God shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus." Mark 11:25 says, "And when ye stand praying, forgive." Just forgive. One of my I have a lot of favorite verses, but one of my other ones, and I think I have favorite verses because I've had to rely on them through my intentional healing journey. This is what I'm going through. This is what I'm trying to help people with. So I'm very grateful that these verses come to mind. But 1 Peter 5:7, casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. That is his comfort for us. And how amazing that is. Drink here real quick. I think living inside God's truth, the one great thing about it is that it doesn't require perfection. Because if we're turning our situations or circumstances over to him, he's the one taking care of it, right? It happens even in the small moments, like I said before, pausing to pray before reacting, or, something happens at work. It's a silent prayer of, God, how do I respond? I think those are things that show that we're living in God's truth, his reality, and by faith. Faith is a big thing for a lot of people. How can you trust someone you've never seen? I think everybody has faith every single day and they don't even realize, you know. I think an atheist has to have more faith than anyone, if you think about it. Um, we have faith that our car is going to start so we can go to work. We have faith that we're not going to trip down the stairs. I have faith in that all the time, and sometimes it happens anyway. But I have faith that I'm going to stand back up. You know, the other way I think that we can get through each day is trusting his timing, even when it doesn't make sense, right? I've had a situation for probably the last 3 or 4 years that I thought was going in one direction. It went in a completely opposite direction. I wasn't prepared for it mentally. My heart wasn't prepared for it. It just doesn't make sense. But I have to have faith. I have to have faith that in the end, it'll work out the way it's supposed to. Faith is practical. I mean, honestly, like I said, every one of us has faith in some capacity every single day. So I really want you to ask yourself where you can invite God in today. Can you invite him into your home, into your work? The best place I think to invite God in, first and foremost, is into your heart. From your heart, invite him into your thoughts. Because once you invite him into your heart and into your thoughts, your decisions are better. Your day-to-day life is better. Your work life is better. Your home life is better. So invite him into your heart first, and then make a conscious choice to invite him into your thoughts. 2 Corinthians 5:7 says, "For we walk by faith, not by sight." Proverbs 3:5-6 say, "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and he shall direct thy paths." In James 1:22, this verse urges us to, but be ye doers of the word and not hearers only. And I have to daily, my daily struggle, and I've tried to be as authentic as possible and as honest as I can be. Um, I struggle with my daily devotions. There are days where I'm like, oh, shoot, I didn't have time to sit down and read, or oh my goodness, but it's because I put so much on myself. I have so much to do, so many things to do. And I know that if I would, you know, and I'm not saying that's every day, but on those days I'm like, I should have just rested. Just be still and know that I am God and I will take care of the rest, right? That's what he says. So don't miss that part where, you know, he has everything in his word. These days it reads like a newspaper, but it is a life guide. It truly is. And how do we have joy in God's truth, in God's reality, not our reality? Because joy isn't the absence of trouble. It doesn't mean we're not going to go through it. It doesn't mean we're not going through a storm. We can still have joy and go through a storm because our joy is not found in this world. Our joy is found in the presence of God. And joy, to me, you have joy because you have the confidence that God is there and he always will be. He's always there working, he's always there guiding, loving you, defending you. I think joy and peace are those steady things when you have God in your heart. They are those steady things that are always there, even when life is not steady. Nehemiah 8:10 reminds us that the joy of the Lord is our strength. And I have lived that verse so many times. But Psalm 16:11 says, "In thy presence is fullness of joy." And God's presence is joy. Romans 15:13 Now the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing. See, I don't believe peace can be faked. I think some people can say they're one way and not be, and be completely different and be deceivers. But I don't think the peace that God gives somebody can be faked. Peace is born from trusting God. And it's born from a heart that surrenders and rests in God, even when there's storms, even when life is uncertain. See, when I was, going through those years um, of worthlessness, the one thing that never left me was peace. Peace in knowing that if today was my last day, I was still going to see God on the other side. But I don't know if this makes sense, but I have more peace now because I feel like peace and joy, those things that are only in God, grow, especially when we take our hands off and we let God lead. We let Him be our strength. We let Him be our purpose. Isaiah 26:3 says, "Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee." John 14:27 says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you." See, our peace comes from Him. So, how do we start? How do we start living in God's truth? Well, first and foremost, the only way to truly start is to accept Jesus into your heart. Talking from someone who is a Christian and has Jesus in my heart, to someone else who's also a Christian who has just kind of lost their way, this would be to them kind of, how do you come back to God's truth, God's reality? And I would say, I wrote a few things down, but I would say there are these things, right? Pray honestly. Your prayer does not have to be, oh, holy and, just saying every word correctly. It doesn't have to be that way because God knows your heart. He knows what you're trying to say. So just speak your heart. That's all. Read daily. Read the Bible. The Bible, like I said, is like I guess it's like your own personal life coach. It gives us all the structure. I wish, you know, I said I didn't have very many regrets, but I guess the other one would be that I didn't stay in. Because I think if I would have stayed in the Word, God would have shown me how to get over the fear, how to not be acclimated to this. So stay in the Word. God will give you a verse every day if you ask Him. He'll give you a word every day. That's kind of where SoulHygiene was born. Was, I almost died of COVID in 2021. And a few months after I came home on oxygen, I lost most of my hair. I literally was almost bald. And I cried. I cried. And I just prayed, God, there has to be a purpose for me. There has to be something that I can do on this earth to praise you, because I was grateful that I didn't die. I had two people that I know of that I was close to almost my whole life die of COVID while I was in the hospital. And I was able to survive. And I know many people lost their loved ones. So I really, really wanted purpose. And I prayed. And one morning I woke up at 3 a.m., which I must have an internal alarm clock because I wake up at 3 a.m. every single day. And I just heard those words, soul hygiene. You're going to go take a shower, but how clean's your soul? And that's where it was kind of born out of. Was me praying honestly, asking God for guidance. And then it was like when I found that purpose, things just kind of fell into place. People came into my life that showed me, hey, you can do this, or, you know, doors started opening. I started my podcast, and it has been a blessing. It has truly been a blessing. And now every single morning, I wake up grateful. And I think gratitude is one of those things that if you are grateful for what you have and where you are, you're going to be okay. You're not going to want everything or want what somebody else has. Right? You let go of what you can't control and let God control it. Let God take care of it. I found friends who strengthened me through those times. Really good friends who gave me the encouragement to keep going. And here's one thing, there are always going to be big things that come into our lives, right? But sometimes we forget the little things. Trust God in the little things too. Because sometimes those little things are little stepping stones. And those little things will bring you to a big thing that God wants you to see, or He wants to bless you with, something holy. So don't dismiss those. So here's a question. What is one area of your life that God is asking you to trust Him? Just one. James 4:8 says, draw nigh to God and He will draw nigh to you. If you truly, truly seek His guidance, He will help you. He really will. 1 Thessalonians 5 says, rejoice evermore, pray without ceasing, and everything give thanks. In everything, not just at Thanksgiving, okay? Every single day, give thanks, have gratitude. So here's a little reflection on what we've talked about. When things feel heavy, where do you turn? And what story are you believing about God, or do you even believe in God? What would it take for you to come out of your reality and into God's and trust Him with your life? Psalm 139:23, search me, O God, and know my heart. Jeremiah 33:3, call unto me, and I will answer thee. So, my friends, the one thing I can say is that God is not a long distance friend. He is always here, and you can constantly abide in Him. He is steady, He is strong. You don't have to prove yourself worthy. You really don't. Simply ask God, Lord, where do you want me to go? What do you want me to do? The one thing I pray for my listeners, for my friends on the daily is that number one, you'll find joy. And that your joy will remain steady and unwavering. And that your peace, if you have peace of God, that it will go stronger every day. And we are human. We are human. Okay. But I really pray that even if you don't believe in God, that you find your way to him and that you're able to rest, that you're able to rest in his truth. You're able to come out of your own perception, your own emotions, your own opinions, your own reality, and just trust God's reality. It's the best thing you'll ever do. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me for this episode. Like I said, I wasn't prepared for it, kind of was, writing things down. And I'm just really glad that God really had me get on here and just share my heart with you. So thank you again. And our story continues. I hope you'll join me by listening to the podcast. And I will be doing these more often because I do have a brain that doesn't shut off. So I have a lot of thoughts up there that I think will help somebody. So trust God, and I hope you continue to walk with him. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this podcast. It's not about perfection. It's about redemption, resilience, and the God who never stops searching for us. If something here spoke to you, let it stir your heart toward healing and toward the Redeemer. Share it with someone who needs a little light, a little laughter, or a little faith to keep going. I'm Miss Teejay, and this is Soul Hygiene, where we learn, grow, forgive, and keep walking together in grace.